What happens when a gun-wielding aristocrat faces off against a trespasser who simply picked the wrong farm? Here is a tale of how a simple mistake resulted in fatality and public outrage, and a headline-grabbing criminal trial. Will privilege tip the scales of justice? Journey into a legal drama where the definition of murder hangs by a thread, and that thread is as tangled as the history of the man on trial. Our story begins with Thomas Patrick Gilbert Cholmondeley. I know, quite a mouthful of a name. A stiff upper lip and a bewildering sense of entitlement, Cholmondeley owned the vast Delamere estate in Kenya's Rift Valley. So large, in fact, that losing track of a few things here and there was to be expected. Things like, trespassers. But more on that later. Thomas was a man who clearly enjoyed a touch of adventure. One day, he planned a little excursion on his ranch with his longtime buddy Carl Tundo. Their mission? To scout out a prime spot for Carl's new house. You see, being the typical friend indeed, Thomas had agreed to let Carl put up a farmhouse for himself on the sprawling Delamere estate. Coincidentally, on the day of Thomas and Carl's planned excursion, a local villager had plans of his own, which also involved the Delamere property. Enter Robert Njoya, a hapless village poacher who, as we shall see, had the terrible misfortune of picking Cholmondeley's land as his playground that fateful day. The ranch was a bit of a wildlife hotspot, which might explain why Robert was so drawn to it in the first place. Meanwhile, Thomas was also thinking of the wildlife, and since he felt that wild animals couldn't be trusted, wisdom dictated that he carries some serious firepower while heading out with his buddy Carl. He packed a rifle, loaded with 2 rounds, plus a box of extra ammo. Armed and ready, the duo hopped into Carl's Toyota RAV4 and up the hills they went. So now, we have a zealous trespasser coupled with a no-nonsense gun-wielding homeowner. What could possibly go wrong? After a brief inspection of the potential property, which Carl deemed too bushy and unscenic, the two friends opted to ditch the car and stroll into the wild a bit. This is where the plot thickens. While wandering about in the bush, Carl decided to take a bathroom break. Left alone, Thomas thought he heard some sounds in the surrounding thickets. He thought of the wild buffalo that had recently run amok and killed 3 people, and was determined not to become a statistic. However, listening closer, he realized those were men's voices. He could have sworn he heard them mutter that he was about as threatening as a rubber duck and wouldn't do a thing to them, or their dogs. Rifle at the ready and nerves set to maximum paranoia, things escalated fast as Thomas, who, with all the demeanor and tension of coiled spring, shot twice at one of the dogs. Then, just as he was preparing to reload and possibly overreact further, his buddy Carl reappeared from the bushes brandishing a pistol. The tension and anxiety must have been contagious, as Carl too fired off his gun. By this time, most of the men had run for dear life, all except Robert, who lay on the ground, profusely bleeding from a gunshot wound and muttering profanities at Thomas. Meanwhile, back at the village, Robert's wife Sarah was at home anxiously awaiting her husband's return when 3 of Robert's friends, Peter, Joseph, and Ndegwa, came knocking on her door. Looking unusually concerned, they asked if Robert was home, and Sarah, suppressing a sigh, said no. The trio, demonstrating unexpected detective skills, pointed out that Robert's dog had returned without its master. The trio then casually mentioned they'd been at Delamere Farm earlier, where they had heard gunshots, but they had heroically ran away. They reassured Sarah they'd go back and wait at the ranch fence for Robert to show up. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Thomas, suddenly the model citizen, tried to help the injured fellow, whom he may or may not have shot. In a display of efficiency only a panicked man can muster, he'd reportedly tried calling for help. But alas, despite their best efforts, Robert succumbed to his injuries on his way to hospital, turning what was supposed to be a peaceful farm tour into a headline-grabbing tragedy. That night, Sarah waited for Robert, who, unlike the good husband he was, never came back. The next day, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands and went to the police station. There, two officers, who clearly had not missed their calling as grief counselors, bluntly informed her that Robert had been shot at Delamere Farm and had died on the way to the hospital. The news spread fast. Peter, Robert's lifelong friend and partner, in what can only be described as the worst hunting expedition in the history of poaching, also learned that Robert had actually been fatally shot. The least he could do at this point was aid the police as they embarked on an investigation that would soon culminate in one of the most high-profile murder trials in Kenya at the time. The trial. The case began in earnest, and Thomas, not one to waste a moment, promptly denied everything. Caught in this whirlwind of misadventure, he maintained that he couldn't have shot the unfortunate man and was, in fact, perplexed by the whole ordeal. He then paraded a small army of witnesses who, as we shall soon see, took their oath seriously. More seriously than defending Thomas. They simply gave their truthful version of what transpired that fateful day. Ironically, this did little to defend Thomas. If anything, their testimony only slathered a fresh layer of doubt about his innocence. Curiously, also, was the fact that Tom's pal Carl decided to switch teams and testify for the prosecution. Even the judge dryly noted that the warm camaraderie between them seemed to have cooled to frostier detachment. Back to the defense witnesses. First up were three farm workers who detailed the various tasks they had been asked to perform following the shooting. These ranged from washing the bloody car to hiding one of the dog carcasses from the police. The final act in the defense's theatrical performance featured a forensic pathologist who made a last-ditch attempt to create reasonable doubt. He tried sprinkling some uncertainty as to who had fired the fateful shot. With the air of someone trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat, the pathologist sensationally claimed that the fatal shot came from a low-velocity gun. He implied that it was Carl's piece and not Thomas's high-velocity rifle that had ended Robert's life. The verdict. In summary, we have a tale of misplaced gunfire, dubious decisions, and an ensemble cast of characters, each adding their own flavor to the courtroom drama. At the end of it all, the court found that it was indeed Thomas who shot the deceased. However, the judge reckoned that this was not a premeditated killing and that Thomas had not intended to kill Robert. The court found Thomas guilty of manslaughter instead of murder, essentially saying, "You did it, but it wasn't entirely your fault. You were just defending your property." Now for the kicker. His sentence was a measly 8 months in prison. Given that this was not Thomas's first brush with the law, there was plenty of public debate regarding his conviction and sentence. Some felt that the sentence was too lenient in the circumstances. The case highlighted issues of class, race, and justice in Kenya, sparking national debate and leading to discussions about the influence of wealth and power in the Kenyan legal system. What do you think? Did Robert get the justice he deserved? Please, let us know in the comments. Also, for more on Trespass, please check out our upcoming video where we elaborate on why someone can seemingly get away with hurting you if you trespass. See you there.